At least let me rest on that icy couch. At least let me rest on that icy couch. In a way, this phrase sums up the central insight and rigour of Jocko's teaching. What on earth is this icy couch, and why would I choose to rest there, and how did I get there in the first place, and simply why? Icy is cold. Cold is, well, certainly if we're resting, unpleasant. We can think of the coldness of death. We can think of the tomb, the mortuary slab. Maybe those kind of memorials in English parish churches that have the person who's being memorialised, or maybe the couple laid out as if in death, in their best clothes, presenting themselves the spectacle of their death as a reminder for the rest of us. Of course, we talk about death in Zen. Sometimes Zen teachers say, this is quoting Joko, sometimes Zen teachers talk about how you die on the cushion. You give up your own personal version of life and just let it be. It's hard, but it's not impossible. And then the wonder happens. And of course, in one way, Zazen is quite cold. It's a bit like death. It's about stillness, inaction, not moving. And the icy couch is definitely a place of stillness, inaction, not moving, restraint. In a way it gets worse actually, because obviously if we're dead we feel no pain. We're not aware of anything, and yet our Zazen is the exact opposite of that. It's about feeling everything. So if we wanted a different image, it would be like being paralysed, utterly unable to move a muscle, and yet aware and experiencing everything. Or maybe like that common nightmare fear of being buried alive, dead but not dead, consigned to the tomb but unable to do anything about it. It's not a nice place, not a nice place at all. It's about our suffering. Now, if we were paralysed and completely aware, our absolute desire would be to be able to move. If I thought I had been buried alive, would I just lie there and enjoy it? My guess is I would fight with every fibre of my being to escape. And yet the quote goes, at least let us rest on this icy couch, and rest is absolutely crucial here. We're not being confined, we're not being immobilised, we're not fighting against it. This immobility, This stillness is voluntary. It's what I do. I rest. And I'm not staying here against my will. I'm resting, remaining, but also relaxing into this icy couch, this terrifying, fearsome place. And make no mistake, the icy couch is about our suffering, completely. I'll try and pick out a few phrases of Joko's which convey this a little. Where are we? We often first experience this as a scream. We cannot bear to feel bad. It is excruciatingly painful. We don't want to see it because it's always so bad. If you dig deep enough, if you meditate enough, there it is. When you really see it, it goes bing, and you know that's it. It's always, always painful. It's like you're about to vomit. It's that awful feeling. That's the one. When you feel something like a punch in the stomach, then you know you've got it. Exceedingly painful. It's like a close to death feeling. That pain has to be dealt with. It's too unbearable. And yet, she says, when we sit day by day, we begin to develop very slowly, very tentatively, the ability to return to the only thing which is to enter right down into the pain. You have to dive right into it and learn to live there. This is your practice. To learn to just rest in the pain. As Benoit says, at least let me rest on that icy couch. There's nothing to be done except rest directly in this pain. Finally, we can sit in dignity in the middle of that. Just sit there and let the pain and the misery be. That's the dignity of sitting. That's an awesome, wonderful, horrible description of our practice. When we talk about that, I always want to put it with that other wonderfully inspiring phrase of Joko's. It takes most people about 3 years to begin to understand what the practice actually is, and then they give up. No wonder. So, a little explanation. As Benoit says, of course, this isn't actually Joko's phrase at all. It's what she picked up from what Barry described as one of the most unreadable books I have ever encountered. So, don't try this at home, children. Don't go out and read it. It's Hubert Benoit's The Light of Zen in the West. But it was Joko's favourite book. It was the one book that I asked Barry about it. I said, we all know about your relationship with psychoanalysis, and we all know that Joko wasn't a psych. Where did this idea of the core belief in Tanso come from? He says, well, the only book I ever saw her with, and the only book she ever talked about, was Benoit's The Light of Zen in the West. And it's his phrase. And his book is fascinating. The theoretical framework of it is, dare I say it, garbage. But the actual experience, which leads to this phrase of at least let me rest on the icy couch, was obviously completely transformational for him. And it's that which Joko picked up from the book, this centrality of our experiencing. Now, Joko can sound quite anti-ideas a lot of the time. Same section. And I've been doing a slight sleight of hand here, so we'll clear that up and we'll show the working. We begin, she says, underneath our thoughts to experience for the first time. Once we see underneath all the thoughts we have covering up our experience, what does that feel like? That unknown place is where our practice is, not in the endless analysis of thoughts. And you can take that obviously into the standard Zen, only stop discriminating between good and bad or yes and no. That's the place of practice. Words and phrases, well, fine, but not what Zen's about. She actually clearly doesn't quite mean that because, well, we'll explore that a bit. But this idea of direct experience, finally it's a problematic notion, but in the sense that she's talking about here, the difference between, well, the endless analysis of our thoughts and the thoughts covering up our experience, which I think is this sort of, endless rumination, this endless repetition of explanation, self-criticism, self-justification, the round stuff that we all know about, we all do that and we all understand that. But it's only when that begins to lessen that we stop putting in that input, that we can begin to actually experience, and the awareness, which is what our practice is all about, this multidimensional awareness. And in fact, of course, Joko had her own analytical explanatory structures. If you've read Ordinary Wonder, you'll have read the chapters about the core beliefs. Core beliefs is interesting, and again I actually asked Barry about this because he should know, and he said, well actually I don't really know anything about core beliefs except what Joko says. I don't know where she got the idea from. It's a fairly common standard psychological idea, but we tend to associate it with CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, which isn't about long-running deep analysis so much as finding solutions. And one of the ways in which they do that, and it's a common way in our practice too, is just look at the stories. What stories are we telling ourselves? Where do these stories come from? What patterns do they form? And it's in that sense that Joko was investigating and investing in the idea of core beliefs, but as a framework. Those of you who remember when Laura was sitting with us, she talked at length about Joko's interest in enneagrams. I mean, that's a very complex theoretical structure which you're casting over, framing our experience within. And yet Joko was more than happy to bring that structure because she felt it had some explanatory value. That's a far cry from the complexity and the subtlety of the kind of contemporary psychoanalytic thought which Barry's brought. But in a sense, it's performing the same kind of function. What are the stories we tell about ourselves? How can they heal? How can they help? But, well, okay, one more thing before the but. Joko is fairly consistent in suggesting that there's kind of finally one core belief, one self-story, one thing I say about myself, which kind of runs us, which is always some version of I'm not worth it, I'm not lovable, I'm not valuable, I can't succeed. When we were talking about dissociation and Bromberg the other week, we talked about the kind of developmental trauma. And that's through the child's coming to a sense of not being valued, not being lovable, not being worth it, not being able to have agency, not being able to have a real effect on its real life because it's so bad, because it's so worthless. And in a sense, core belief is the same kind of structure, making the same kind of explanatory offering. But it is finally all stories. As human beings, we're never going to try and do without stories. We need stories. So what makes Joko's different? Is it that with core belief she's found the truly true stories? Well, I don't think so for a minute. They're useful explanatory schema. What's central, what's important, what's life and death about Joko is this business of experience and how our experience on the cushion relates to our everyday life. And I think it's this vision of the Icy Couch which is absolutely central to that. I'm assuming by now our own experience, our reading, our lives have taught us that Zen and Zazen isn't about just finding a cosy place or a quiet place or a whatever place. I think we can take that as read. But this place of real pain, real suffering. Now those descriptions I read were where Joko was talking about really encountering that core belief, when you get down to the one that counts and you get hit in the chest, hit in the stomach, winded, thrown across the other side of the room by it. That realization, that moment of insight. I don't know your experience on the cushion. Barry's been very clear that it's not about looking for final answers. And I think I'd agree with him strongly there, that if I think I've got, the one master story which will explain it all, then no, that's just a stopping off point. That'll do for now. Really, there are only stories and more stories. Some of them we carry, retain their power. But the ones which do have this power to stop us dead in our tracks, to go, rob us of our breath, either completely freeze us on the cushion or literally, send us hurling against the wall, because just the experience of that sudden understanding, that sudden insight is just so powerful, so strong. And that can be touching upon, potentially anything. Trauma in one sense, but yeah, a connection, a sudden dropping. And where that places us, let's just see. Yeah. This is the section, The Wonder of Surrender. Sometimes we get right to the edge of the feeling underneath the strategy we use for dealing with our life, and we veer off. This happened to me the other night about 2 a.m. Perhaps you know something about that. I could tell I was right at the precipice of awareness, and I wanted to swerve. We have our strategies, our ways of avoiding where we don't want to go, and she was just right on the edge. I was right at the precipice of awareness, and I wanted to swerve. It took a long time for me, finally, to just rest in this experience. Why? Well, it's all about tension, it's all about resistance, it's all about no. And to be able to just drop that. even after almost 30 years of practice, it's not easy. And when you finally see that you have no choice but to rest in this pain, it's a surrender. What are you surrendering to? Sometimes Zen teachers talk about how you die on the cushion. You give up your own personal version of life and just let it be. It's hard, but not impossible. And then the wonder happens. What is the wonder? The wonder is the experience of the opening of joy because, well, in Barry's terms, it's not a problem to have problems. One sees that this is simply one's life beyond what one wants or one would wish for or what one's fighting against. This is my life, and it's a problem, but it's not a problem to have this and that problem because they're just my life. Put it around the other way. It's okay not to feel okay. So if I'm on the icy couch and I sit and I sit and I sit and I sit and I find the wonder, is that finding the reality, the truth of myself? Joko again. People often come to Zen because they're looking for the true self, but you can't look for the true self. It's nothing. There's nothing to find. What you can do is to constantly work with the conditioned self. This self that finds it difficult. This self that has problems. This self that resists. This self that says, not that, not there. This self which is my life as it is. Just this, just here, with all its difficulties, its knots. As we've said over and again, this is what we work with. Not some vision of how it might be, but this present reality of what it is. So I'm not looking for that final story that is the truth of me, that's going to make everything clear, that's going to explain everything. There is no final, true truth. There's just this perpetual work of experiencing, of allowing, as it will, me, my process, my inner workings, my whatever you want to call it, my stopping resisting, my stopping pushing away, my stopping turning away, my stopping dissociating from all the stuff that is me, this mess, this morass, whatever's blown itself into my whirlpool. And with that, I sit. This unknown place where practice is. And to come to that other phrase of Joko's, which keep coming back to again and again and again. What does this do to us? We grow. We become this a bigger container. And the more of me I can hold, and the more I learn to rest on the icy couch, and just rest in stillness, in the quiet, then I stop creating mayhem for myself. I stop creating mayhem for others. So, let us rest on the icy couch as and when we find ourselves there, because that is the heart of our practice. I'll read that quote again. When we sit day by day, we begin to develop, very slowly, very tentatively, the ability to return to the only thing that will give us peace, which is to enter right down into the pain. You have to dive right into it and learn to live there. This is your practice, to learn to just rest in the pain. As Benoit says, at least let me rest on that icy couch. There's nothing to be done except to rest directly in this pain. Finally, we can sit in dignity in the middle of that. Just sit there and let the pain and misery be. That's the dignity of sitting.